Yeah, just want to firstly thank Janice for setting me up here for failure, saying that we can't use the past to predict the future. But while I do agree with her, at some point you've got to say, well, what do you use then? Unfortunately, the past is all we've got, and so we have to use that in some way to predict the future. And of course, the bomb models do the same sort of thing. But she sort of set me up for a fail here, saying how difficult it's going to be. But I'll give it a crack and let you know what we're doing and how we're taking our risk-based approach and our adaptive plans to deal with the changing climate and the non-stationarity, which is a really important point that she raised. So what I wanted to talk about, just quickly give you a brief description of the source water system. So you hopefully most people know about it anyway. So I'll quickly skip through that. And then I want to ask the question: what is water security? This is kind of important because we have a few different definitions and a few measures of it. So I'll just talk about that. And there's two parts to it, I guess. One is the long-term security, which I'll go into how we've been doing that, and Icon Water's been doing this pretty much the same way for nearly 20 years, and it's worked well mostly, but climate change certainly does make it a bit more difficult. And then I want to talk about our adaptive plan for droughts and how we've set that system up. And we haven't done it yet, but the next step is to combine those two processes together so we get to model both, and that's where the magic happens. And then I want to just finish with assuring you that ACT is relatively secure. Just a warning, my background is modelling, so hopefully I won't get too excited and passionate about the detail of this, and I can try and keep it at a level which is still fun. Well, fun for you. It will definitely be fun for me. Right, so here's our source water system. We've got the Cotter River on the western side and the Queemy River on the eastern side. I've written the sources down just in order of cheapness, if you like. It's definitely preferable for Icon Water to supply from Bendora and Corrin dams. We can gravity feed, and as you can imagine, the catchment water quality up there is fantastic. So that's definitely our preference, to supply from up there. When there's lots of rain, that's what we do, because that saves the Canberra community lots of money. Once water storages fall a little bit there, though, we then move over to Gould Dam, which is our next cheapest, and then Cotter Dam. So there's a lot of pumping required from Cotter Dam, and that starts getting a bit more expensive. Just because we're in the Upper Murrumbidgee group here, the two sources we have on the Murrumbidgee is the Murrumbidgee to Gould pipeline. That's at the border of the ACT, the southern border of the ACT, and then downstream of that we have the Murrumbidgee to Stromlo. So that's where we pump straight to the water treatment plant. That is a far from preferable solution, as you can imagine, with water quality issues in the Murrumbidgee River, just based with uses upstream. We're pretty nervous about putting that straight into the water treatment plant. We're usually fighting with the quality guys in a drought about when we can do that. So they certainly don't like doing it. Pumping over to Gould Dam is far more preferable, because then the water can sit in the dam and obviously shandy with the water in Gould Dam, and then that gives it at least another barrier before it hits the treatment plant. So what is water security? So Janice mentioned also what we could do is we could use historical droughts to have a guess as to how much water we need in the future. And she's also said it's not a great idea. And the example of that, I guess, is the millennium. This is the millennium drought here, and the red curve is what we actually experienced, and the blue curve is what we'd experience now. So if you went by that drought, you'd say that, well, ACT and Queanbeyan communities are pretty safe here, because we don't even hit 50% storage if we get the worst drought in history. And of course, we did get a worse drought than the millennium drought a couple of years ago, and storages hit 44%. Just a quick explanation for why these two curves are different. The Canberra community has reduced their consumption per capita by nearly 40%, and so that makes us more secure. Obviously, we've got more infrastructure. You can see that the storages are a lot higher on the blue curve because we've got Cotter Dam built now, and we've also got the M2G. So all these infrastructure improvements, as well as the reduced demand, means that we've got a more secure system. But as I said, the recent drought smashed us pretty hard and very quickly, and we learned a lot of lessons from that. And we've tried to adjust what we're doing. So I guess after the millennium drought, we were very relaxed about water security in the ACT. Our modelling showed that we were very secure. We knew we'd built more infrastructure. We knew demand had gone down, so we were very confident that we could withstand. It had to be a very severe drought for us to go to water restrictions, let alone run out of water. So it just didn't seem like it was possible. But then the last drought gave us a bit of a fright, and we're back on the ball now. So the first definition of water security I'd like to present you is from our level of service requirement provided by the ACT government. So the ACT government requires us to meet unrestricted demand for the ACT and Queanbeyan 95% of the time, which is a really awkward and disgusting way of saying effectively having a 5% probability of going into water restrictions. So you can see that this is not a bad measure of your system and its ability to take stress, because when you enter water restrictions, obviously you're doing that to stop you running out of water. And if you don't have to go into water restrictions, then you've clearly got a very secure system. So from that point of view, it's quite a nice definition. The difficulty with it is, of course, is it really has nothing to do with running out of water. And in fact, what we could do is we could lower our triggers for restrictions and improve the security, which is clearly contradictory. We would actually increase our chance of running out of water if we only went into water restrictions just before we ran out of water. So what we've done is we've come up with two others, which measure sort of a drought measure rather than an overall level of service. And what we've come up with here is, in a day zero event, a restricted demand can be supplied sustainably to the community. In other words, when we run out of water, the day zero event for us is we've defined it as a 5% storage. So if we get down to 5% storage, we'll be able to supply sustainably a restricted demand to the community. So we don't have to dip into storages any further. So that's the first objective of our drought response. And the second one is that all these measures required to achieve that will be built and ready in time for the day zero event. And that includes infrastructure augmentation options. So that's kind of how we're looking at water security at Icon Water at the moment. There's a whole pile of other measures we have, of course, as well, but I don't want to overcomplicate this, and this is probably the easiest way to summarize it. So we've got a long-term measure and we've got a drought response measures. So how do we measure the measure? There's two issues here, I guess. How do we incorporate more severe rain events in the historical record? So we've got to make up these droughts that could happen in the future and test the system against it. And how do we measure 5%? And the answer is, as much as Janice is going to cringe at this, stochastic data generation. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the 100 years of history we have, and we're going to extrapolate that out to however many years, let's say a million, just to choose a number. And what that allows us to do is to take the same statistical properties of what's happened in the past and test less likely events. What it also does is it provides with a whole pile of data and a whole heap of possible futures that we can run through the system and then allow us to get a percentage chance or a probability of things happening. So that's the way we can address these two issues with looking into the future. So as I said, it allows us to investigate the low probability events, and it also allows us to perform a Monte Carlo or multiple run analysis to allow probabilities to be identified. I'll just go back there too. So a caveat to this, of course, is all models are wrong, and as a modeler, I'm definitely for that. I've never seen a model that works. However, some of the results and some of the models can be useful, and that's an important point. And that's what we're trying to achieve here: is to provide some guidance for decision makers on how they deal with these future events. So before I get into that, I just want to echo what Janice said about stationarity. So stationarity, the whole concept of that is that you can take the statistical properties of variability are true going forward in time. And obviously with climate change, that's a very bold assumption. The climate is changing, and therefore the statistical properties aren't the same. And this statistical record, this record of stream flows. So this is the stream flows, not rainfall and not temperature. Of history show that you get periods of wet, periods of dry, and even without climate change, even if you take away climate change, you've got long periods of wet and dry cycles taking place in your historical record as well. The last 20 years is the red line there, and that shows the average for the last 20 years being significantly lower than the long-term average, which is the green line. So how much of that's natural variability and how much of that is climate change? I don't want to even try and speculate, but as Janice said, it's pretty clear we're getting a changing climate, and all the global models predict temperature extremely well. They don't predict rainfall particularly well, and they predict stream flow even less well. So while we're confident of the temperatures changing, and clearly that's going to have impacts on rainfall and stream flow, quantifying these things gets a little bit difficult. All right, so here's our historical record. Sure, we can grab all that, we can extrapolate that out to 1 million years or whatever, and we can get these lower probability events into the data and have a look at them. But what about climate change? So as Janice said, there's a couple of ways you can take into account climate change. The way we do it at Icon Water is with the NARCLIM. That was the second structure that she had, the second framework she had that she presented. And the reason we use NARCLIM is because ASD government love it, and so Icon Water's taken as a policy to use NARCLIM where it's appropriate in our climate change adaptions and projections. So the long-term average is the green line up there. These are average inflows to our storages. So the NARCLIM projections there, the orange is the current 20 years that we're in, the blue is the next 20 years, and so on. What we've done is we've grabbed the next 20 years, and you can see that we've taken, this is actually the second worst. The circle there is the second worst of the next 20-year projections, and that lines up pretty well with actually the last 20 years average. And our previous climate change assumption was based on Siaki work, and that was about the same sort of level as well. So our actual projection going forward hasn't actually changed much in terms of climate change. And I just want to pause here for a second and talk about the big risk we have with climate change in the ACT. That is something that we're really grappling with, and we don't really know how to cope with it. And that is that what we're seeing is a change in the relationship between the rainfall and the runoff. So for the same amount of rainfall, we're getting different amounts of runoff, and it's less runoff. We suspect it's something to do with temperature, the temperature changing caused by climate change, but we don't really know, and it'd be nice if the research could tell us what's going on there, because we have no way to predict how it will continue into the future. So while the rainfall and all of that is a little bit scary, and all the rest of it, at Icon Water, yeah, the model is we're not really too stressed by that. What we're really stressed is about the response in stream flows. That's what's frightened us far more than the change in rainfall. So anyway, I just wanted to let you know about that. It's something that we're still grappling with. So effectively, the climate change assumptions, while they haven't changed much, our rainfall models have, and so our system is effectively less secure due to that. That's what's driving it. We've got a second scenario we've chosen, which is the blue circle, and that's the second worst in the 2040 to 2060. The reason we chose this as a sensitivity check scenario is because if climate change happens quicker, then effectively we're going to be in the blue area rather than the orange area, and so it's a good way. It's a good way of choosing an option to stress test the system. We haven't done much work with that yet, but management's agreed that that's a good way to go forward. Once you've taken all that into account, what you can do is you can grab, let's say, 1,000 futures, run 1,000 futures of 40-something years, and then examine each of those futures and see what happens. So what this is the proportion of those futures that end up being in restrictions. And over time, as demand increases and the system becomes more and more stressed, you can see that a high proportion of those futures end up being in restrictions at the same time, until, of course, you hit the magical 5% number the ACT government has told us is the level of service limit that we can get to. So obviously we need to augment at that point there where the orange line hits the pink line, or the blue line hits the pink line. Having said that, if your solution is going to be build a dam, you probably need to go back 20 years before that and start planning and start constructing it at least 10 years before that, so that the dam is ready for when you need it. So this is just an example of what you can do with that stochastic data and a climate change assumption to measure the long-term level of service that we're required to do. This was actually done before the last drought, and it's not quite as pretty this after the drought. I don't have that to show you today though. So let's say that's all true and that works, and in actual fact we are meeting our level of service. That doesn't mean that we're not going to run out of water. You could still get a drought in amongst that, which means you run out of water. So this is why we need those measures and a drought response plan. So we call it the drought management plan. And I just want to go through with you what that is, because that's probably of more interest, particularly after Janice's discussion on climate change and how we need a risk-based approach rather than this kind of deterministic process that she's been critical of when the climate's changing. So we've got 3 levers to achieve the 2 objectives of the drought management plan. So just remember, the drought management plan needs to be able to supply sustainable demand in a day zero event, and it needs to have everything in place in time for that day zero event. So the 3 levers we have are operational actions firstly. So what we can do is use expensive sources. The Murrumbidgee River is an extremely secure source for Canberra, because if we use the water, we don't take any water out of our dams. If we don't use the water, it flows past the ACT and goes into Burrinjuck, and we don't get to use it at all. So clearly the most water secure source we can use is the river water. But the dams are the same as well. If you use just Bendora Dam exclusively, then while you're using Bendora Dam, you've probably got water spilling over Gould Dam. So it's much more secure to bring the dams down sort of all together, rather than one then the other then the next. So obviously that increases the operational costs, and so there is a cost to it. It's not free, but there's a lot of ways we can run the system and to be either more secure or less secure. The second lever we've got is demand action. So what we can do there is do voluntary and mandatory reduced consumption. So temporary water restrictions is obviously a mandatory reduction of consumption, but there's lots of other things we can do too. For example, we can go through and help big businesses with water audits and identify where they've got leakage or where they've got wastage, and save water in lots of ways, which is economically viable too. So that's definitely a big option and a big way to save water. The third one is to augment supply. So we need to find new sources. Ideally, these new sources would be less climate dependent than the current ones. So in other words, we'd want to stay away from surface water, because once you're in the middle of a drought, there's probably not much of it around anyway. So recycling water is a classic example of that. Groundwater would be pretty useful too, and desalination water is obviously the best, but probably not an option for us. Okay, so they're the options that we've got to deal with this. The next thing I want to talk about is the drought we're going to plan for. So we've called this the design drought, and this is effectively the drought where the drought management plan should be able to cope with, and we should be able to succeed. If we get a drought worse than the design drought, well then we can't. So there's a couple of ways we can choose this design drought. One is we just take the worst historical drought, but we've already agreed that that's a stupid way to do it. It's not going to work, particularly with climate change. The second thing we can do is dream up the worst drought we can come up with, and that one is pretty easy. It doesn't rain again. Now that might sound a bit silly. That's kind of the approach Perth has taken. They're trying to set up their system with no dependence on rainfall. For an inland city like Canberra, that's a little bit farcical, because no matter what we do, there's going to be at least some tie to climate. So we need rainfall to be able to do anything. So apart from the fact that it's probably never going to happen, the second issue with that scenario is that we can't solve it anyway. So, okay, well, let's take our stochastic data and take one of these crazy events. The problem with using the worst stochastic data drought is that if you increase the number of years that you're generating data for, you get a worse one. So that's kind of a never-ending box, never-ending process as well. And another one would be to take a certain average recurrence interval event. The problem with this is with a non-stationary climate, like with climate change, is that's going to keep on changing as well. So that might not be the best one either. What we ended up coming up with was something tangible, something tied to history. And what we did was we looked at the worst 12 months periods that we've got in the historical data, and we decide what we'll do is we'll just repeat that over and over again until we break the system. So there's a few here, but there's a few options we have here, and you can see that they're all actually worse than the stochastic drought we were looking at the time as well. What we ended up taking was the 2006-2007 year. So in other words, the worst 12 months from the Millennium Drought, because that was actually a good representation of a dry year in terms of how it impacted all the sources. So that's what we ended up using for the design drought, and we actually stole the idea from Underwater. They do something very similar for the way they do their design and stress their system. So we got management to approve the design drought, and so we're set there. They also gave us a couple of other things to do. So we got our best operating rules. So our first lever, we just optimized them for the most economically efficient way, and so we've got a set of rules now, operating rules. Management had a requirement to constrain us on how much demand work we could do. So they didn't want to see any plan that required residents to use less than 120 litres per person per day. This puts a bit of a flaw on how far we can pull down the consumption, and means that we have to make up the rest through the third lever on supply. Now, I just want to say that this is not silly. It makes a lot of sense to do this. And then if we do get in the situation where the drought management plan is looking like it's failing, then obviously we can go to more extreme demand management situations. And obviously, hopefully you guys know about Cape Town back in 2017, went through some quite draconian measures and planned for more before they got out of their drought. And we could do the same thing here. So you've always got a contingency. If you don't rely on that as part of your plan, it's always a contingency for if things got worse. So when you put all that together, it ends up taking about 8 to 9 years based on the current system for us to run out of water, and we need to make up 12 gigalitres a year of new sources to cope with that, to provide a sustainable supply at 5% storage. So that's effectively the parameters of the third lever. We need to find that much supply. So we went through a whole pile of supply options that would work in a drought. So funny enough, building dams was not a good option. They take too long, and they don't actually provide you with a lot of water during the drought. They're very good if they're full at the start of a drought, but they're not that good once you're into a drought. So what we did was we came up with a whole heap of ideas and options, and then we costed them and identified lead times they'd take to implement, and then that actually gives us also a trigger for when we have to use them, a storage trigger for when we have to implement them, because we've got our design drought. We know that if we need 12 months before 5% storage, we can go back along the design drought, work out what storage level that's at, and now we have a storage trigger for when we need to start the building of the new source. So so that solves our time problem as well, making sure that we're going to have these things in time for the day zero event. So with all these options, we developed several portfolios, and the portfolios had kind of different benefits and costs. So the early portfolios were very easy to implement and cheap solutions, but they have a high risk of not working. What ends up happening is these solutions tend to be more climate dependent, and because they're climate dependent, there's risk. There's a lot of risk involved with being able to get 12 gigalitres a year out of the options. And then we went through to other solutions, other portfolios which were difficult to implement and expensive to implement, but then give you a high resilience during these Armageddon droughts that we're talking about. So that while they'd be hard to implement and have a lot more risk with that implementation, once they're built, you've got a much better system. Of course, the other cost there is if you don't get that drought for a few years, you've got a bit of white elephant in the meantime. So the magic still to come is to put these two plans together. So what we really want to be able to do is whack the drought management plan into the long-term model, and then that will allow us to do all sorts of cool assessments. We'll be able to estimate the probability of the drought management plan will succeed, and as well as the probability it will fail. We get to stress test it against that more severe climate change scenario that we want to use, and so that'll obviously change those likelihoods of success and failure. We want to optimize the drought management plan. So there's still heaps of variation. As I said, there were lots of options we had, and maybe it makes more sense to actually do a little bit more work early on, and then that will save you enough water to give you enough time to build the very big large ones later on, and maybe even use them at a lower trigger level, lower storage trigger level, which will mean you don't spend as much money as often. The other thing you get to do, of course, is estimate the likelihood of when that big spend comes along, and that can be really useful in terms of informing finance and regulators and everybody, and even the community about when likely, how likely we are to actually need to build some of these massive infrastructure projects. So so there's lots of work for us to do in the modelling team to help support some of these decisions and to help support the framework that we've got for our water security. So what's the point of all this? Well, firstly, Owen Water is super aware of the importance of water security, despite the fact water is spilling over the dams at the moment at a fantastic rate. We have not put this on the back burner. Well, obviously, priorities-wise, it is a bit lower than it otherwise would be if we're in a drought. We have still been putting plenty of work into this space since the drought. There's been a lot of lessons learned from the drought, and we're trying to get things in place so we're ready for the next one. Customers and regulators see it as one of our highest priorities, which is no particular surprise. There's heaps of political interest, of course, too, whether that's because politicians don't like going to water restrictions. That has costs and political costs. But just also from questions just on water security. Not to mention our ability to handle climate change with the Greens in ACT. They're particularly interested in how we're dealing with that. But it's difficult. It's complicated. It's uncertain, and this makes it. This makes it very hard to come up with a system that is an efficient response to it. So we're trying to predict the weather, and we're nowhere near as smart as the bomb. So trying to do that is a bit of a mug's game. We're trying to quantify climate change, and while the science is pretty good in the temperature space, in the rainfall and the runoff space, it's far less good. We need to know how our customers are going to consume, and we've got to project that going forward year into the decades. And that, and even something as simple as population projections can be extremely uncertain. I mean, with COVID, for example, population's actually gone down in Canberra rather than up, and so that's changed a whole pile of projections, demand projections. But I guess what I wanted to assure you is that we're all over it. We're doing our best, and our best is a combination of making sure that we've got a certain stability of security, a certain stability, resilience, I guess, and then we've got an adaptive plan on top of that to deal with whatever comes up. So I might just leave it there, and if you've got any questions, feel free. But I'll be in the panel session as well, so I can answer anything then too.
Well, thank you so much, Owen. As a former modeller myself, I love a modeller who's passionate about their modelling, and you've really given us an insight into your world and some of the difficult considerations that you've got in Icon Water Supply. So thank you so much. Now we do have a couple of questions. So Lisa's asked the first one around. Does your modelling take population increase and changes in demand into account?
Yeah, there's a few things here. We since the drought, we've always done this, and the biggest impact to consumption behaviour ends up being the weather. So obviously, when it's hot and dry, people use more water, and particularly in Canberra where there's a lot of gardens, we see that in our data all the time. The difficulty is, as Canberra grows, you can imagine that there's going to be more and more people moving into units, high-rise buildings, et cetera, where they use less water than an existing member of the community would use. So the consumption patterns do change, and we've tried to do that, and we've actually enhanced our demand model to take that into account. So going forward, we've got a much better ability to project demands. Having said that, trying to predict human behaviour is hard going. And there's always uncertainty around that. So what we've actually seen since the 80s is pretty much a gradual decrease of water per capita consumption per capita. I actually expect that to continue. We don't plan for that. We plan for more people to mean more water consumption. But I wouldn't be surprised if we continue to see reductions. For example, technology of water saving devices has kept on improving things, and so yeah, it's a tough one to predict, but it's not hard to project a conservative line. And if we do that, then we're in a good place from a planning point of view.
Right, thank you, Owen. We've got quite a few people asking questions, so as you've generated a lot of interest. We might not be able to get all of them right now, but we'll see how we go, and we can save some for the panel discussion later on if we need to. So Paul Wywell has got a question. Paul, over to you.
Thanks very much, Owen, for your presentation. Paul Vervol from the ANU's Crawford School of Public Policy. I wanted to pick up on the option that you mentioned around Tantangara releases, which I know there's already been work that's been done on this. And I was wondering if you could share a little bit more information around how you calculate the cost of that particular option, how much of that involves compensating Snowy Hydro for the opportunity cost of foregone electricity generation, and how do you expect that cost might change with Snowy 2.0? Thanks.
Yeah, excellent question, Paul. Look, it's a bit of a tricky one. Icon Water actually had a commercial contract with Snowy Hydro some years back. We ended up terminating it because economically it was a bit awkward. It didn't really make sense. It wasn't value for money. Now that the Snowy is owned by the Commonwealth Government, we're very keen to start a conversation around critical human needs. So obviously the releases from Tantangra Dam already have to supply water for Cooma, and the question we'd put forward is that if we're in a massive drought and Canberra needs water, then why wouldn't you do the same sort of thing? So because we've had a commercial agreement with Snowy Hydro, we kind of do understand some of the costs involved with them holding back water and obviously the loss. So there's two costs, I guess. There's the opportunity cost where they've got to hold the water in Tantangra Dam rather than release it down and make money out of it. And then there's the cost of actually diverting the water the other way. They don't get the generation. So there's a cost per megalitre, and then there's an opportunity cost. And we just have to work out with them what's a sensible way to do that. I'd like to think that the opportunity cost could be waived and that could be regulated. And then we just pay the compensation for the lost electricity. But anyway, that's a discussion that has to happen with the Commonwealth Government. And of course, Snowy 2.0 is an interesting concept too, because that means you can move water from anywhere in the system to Blowering and then pump, not Blowering, sorry. Oh, it starts with T. Ooh, sorry, mind blank. And you can pump that back up into Tantangra. So it actually increases the size of the catchment substantially. So if there's any water in that system, you could theoretically pump it back up to Tantangra and release it our way. Now, the cost in that would obviously be significantly higher than the cost of just releasing directly from Tantangra. But the fact that option's there is quite good. Just one thing I'd like to mention, we do have that in our plan. That's one of our high risk ones in the drought management plan, because in the recent drought, we were keeping our eye on the Tantangra levels, because we were still in place during that drought. We still had an agreement with them, and we could have taken water off them. There wasn't much water in Tantangra at the time when we would have wanted it, and so just because it is a very productive catchment and it is very secure, doesn't mean it's fit for purpose for an Armageddon drought. So there's still some big concerns about relying on that in a drought management plan. Hopefully that answers your question, Paul.
Thank you.
Wonderful. It's been a really interesting discussion and some really helpful questions. We do have a few more questions, but unfortunately we're out of time for now. I noticed Janice is one of them, and I'm looking forward to a bit of a panel discussion between you and Janice, Owen. I think there's some right conversation there for the two of you. So we certainly might leave that to the afternoon.